All right. So thank you for joining us for our webinar today. We're going to talk about layered assessments. My name is Snehal Antani. I serve as the co-founder and CEO here at Horizon 3. My background, I've been a CIO at GE Capital. I was the CTO at Splunk, and then served as the first CTO at Joint Special Operations Command within the US military. What we're going to talk about today is this concept of defense in depth and training like you fight, and starting to more effectively test your security controls to ensure that you're able to appropriately defend against an attack. So first and foremost, what I want to cover and talk about is what is defense in depth. So at a very high level, think about it as the application of multiple layers of security, securing your perimeter, your identity, your behavior, user behavior, understanding, and so on, so that you're able to provide a redundancy to your security posture in the event a single control fails. And when you think about the pretty classic castle analogy that is used when talking about defense in depth, your perimeter security, castles will build out their moat to keep people away. They've got very specific entry and exit points with the bridges and gatehouses. Once you're in, you don't have access to the crown jewels. There's still multiple additional layers of security before you can get to the throne room or to the room with all the gold and so on. And so what you think about is this as a metaphor for how you design your security posture. And what's important and part of defense in depth is training like you fight as a principle to verify your security effectiveness. How do you know that the moat is wide enough to prevent people from swimming or jumping across it? How do you know that the bridge is sturdy enough to support the people coming in while preventing large hordes from invading, and so on and so forth? And the only way you can really understand the effectiveness of those multiple layers of security controls is to actually test them. And when you think about broadly accepted security principles, and distilling this down to three, the first is any good security program assumes the attacker is going to get in. There are just too many doors and windows available, from phishing or spear phishing where somebody can click a bad link, to being able to insider threat, or think of SolarWinds and the initial access that gave attackers. There's just way too many ways to get in. And so a good security program assumes the attacker will find a way in and land on a single box, and that the defensive team is focused on stifling the establishment of command and control, so preventing beacons from being emitted, and command and control infrastructure that allows lateral movement and that allows for data exfiltration, and so on. The second kind of broadly accepted security principle is that you want to proactively harden your systems and proactively find security weaknesses, fix those security weaknesses, and verify the remediation of those security weaknesses prior to a breach versus during or after a breach. And the third accepted principle is that you want to be able to exercise your security operations processes prior to a breach versus during or after. And that's where the sparring partner training like you fight come into play. So with that as a general understanding of defense in depth, what I'm going to talk about are a couple of examples of porous defense. So the first is, the punchline here is, hey, my endpoint detect and response product should have caught that. And some background here in critical enablers for this particular attack is this capability called LSAS. It's your local security authority subsystem service. The LSAS process within Windows is what's used to store credentials locally or within a user domain. And think about it as, when you log into your Windows machine, you don't have to re-log in every time you want to touch a network resource or open a file. Your credentials are stored locally, so you don't have to constantly re-authenticate or reauthorize. But the LSAS process is where all those credentials are stored locally on the Windows machine, and those credentials are stored in memory in that process as plain text, or as NTLM hashes, or as Kerberos tickets, and so on. And so what an attacker will want to do is, once they get access to a particular machine, they're going to try to dump the memory dump of that LSAS process and try to pull out passwords that were stored. The objective is to achieve a critical impact, like becoming a domain administrator within that Windows domain. And a domain administrator in Windows is a special user account that can edit information in Active Directory. And Active Directory is that entity within your environment that is used to authenticate and authorize all windows in the domain. And so once an attacker is able to become a domain administrator, they have keys to your kingdom. At that point, it's game over. They can do whatever they want. So with that as background, here is an example story where Node Zero, our autonomous pen testing product, was able to, upon gaining initial access, get onto a machine and dump the LSAS process, successfully pilfer all of the passwords, and then use those passwords to escalate their privileges to become a domain administrator. And if you look at the path in here, you can see that Node Zero was able to grab a credential, crack the particular NTLM hash, and then from there, it was able to elevate privileges and get into the domain. Fortinet was the EDR product being used by this particular medical company that we were working with, and they did not detect the dumping of the LSAS process. And this is something that an EDR solution is designed to do. So at first, the reaction from the customer was, there's no way this was possible. And as we showed the proof, and you can see these green boxes, and you click, you'll see the actual proof of exploitation, it became very clear that yes, Node Zero was successfully able to dump LSAS, escalate privileges, and become a domain administrator within their environment. And then we started to work with that customer to engage with Fortinet to understand what happened. And at first, Fortinet was defensive and said, nope, there's no way this is possible. As we walked through and showed the proof, there was an awkward silence of, yes, this in fact was the case. And the conclusion by Fortinet was the EDR was not properly configured on several machines, which is what allowed us to dump the LSAS process. And in addition, our ability to laterally move and elevate privileges to become a domain administrator was not a capability solved by their core EDR product, and that the medical clinic didn't purchase the right add-on products and modules to detect that type of activity from an attacker. So here in this example, what you have is a very clear proven path to become a domain admin where it's game over. You had a customer that believed they were protected from this particular attack vector because they had purchased the right tools, but those tools were not properly configured everywhere, and they didn't purchase everything that was expected in order to stifle this attack. And so this led to a fairly serious set of painful conversations between that customer and Fortinet. And in the meantime, they continued to run Node Zero to identify additional gaps within their defenses. The second story that I'll tell you is, hey, I thought we were patched. And the background here is the zero logon vulnerability. So zero logon was a critical vulnerability found in 2020 within the authentication protocol for Microsoft and how they authenticate you within their environment. Zero logon enables attackers to access all of the valid usernames and passwords in the network. So this is an absolute big deal. And if you're exploitable to zero logon, once again, the attacker has the keys to your kingdom, and they can do anything they want, oftentimes undetected. And as they harvest a user ID and password through the zero logon vulnerability, from there, they will once again find ways to escalate privileges and access sensitive data. Now, this was such a critical problem that an emergency directive was pushed out by CISA and other entities that said, you must patch zero logon as soon as possible. And for this particular medical organization, Node Zero, our autonomous pen testing product, was able to leverage zero logon and exploit it in order to gain keys to the kingdom. And we were able to prove that zero logon was indeed not patched, despite the Microsoft and Qualys reports saying that it was. And as we helped the team understand what was going on, it turned out that during the application of the actual patch, the zero logon patch, Cylance at the very last step blocked the binary update. And so while the user registry and registry keys were updated to indicate that the patch had been applied, and that's what Microsoft and Qualys depend on for their reporting, the actual binary wasn't successfully applied because of this silence block. And so as a result, this medical clinic or this medical facility had been misreporting the patching status of zero logon for 18 months. And what that means is for 18 months, it was absolutely feasible for an attacker to gain access to that facility, gain access to all the valid usernames and passwords, borrow, steal data, ransomware the environment, and cause catastrophic effects. And so as a follow-on to their and everyone's typical practice of Patch Tuesday, where they're applying patches and upgrading all their equipment, they've now added a Pen Test Wednesday using Node Zero to verify, in fact, that they are no longer exploitable to things like zero login and other critical vulnerabilities. And so even though both of these companies were doing the right thing, they had purchased the right EDR products, they had the right patching policies and controls in place, they were implicitly trusting these products, but they weren't verifying the effectiveness of those products and of those tools. And this is where layered defense comes into play. Now, if you generalize those attacks, attackers don't have to hack in like using 0 days like you see in the movies. Often they're able to just log in using valid credentials and misconfigurations and dangerous product defaults that they've been able to collect throughout your environment. And if you look at this example, an attacker is able to go find all of your employee names through LinkedIn. And from there, all it takes is one employee to reuse their Netflix password for their corporate email password, which attackers are able to find through breach databases and other dark web sources of information. And from there, they're going to try to gain access to your externally exposed systems using credentialed spraying, credentialed stuffing, and other techniques like that. And once they're able to find information, they will rinse and repeat until they're able to gain access into your environment. And then from there, they'll start to chain together a variety of misconfigurations or within your security products or in your enterprise products in order to achieve a critical impact like domain admin. In this particular example, no CVEs and no malware were required to be used. And so for organizations, how quickly can you detect this and how do you actually know? So this is where defense in depth and assessment in depth comes into play. So when you think about defense in depth or layered defense, the hardest part of my job when I was a CIO and my time at Splunk and elsewhere was deciding what not to fix from a cybersecurity standpoint. I had limited time and money, I had limited expertise, and I had to be very careful of where I devoted my time and resources to maximize my impact on our security posture. And so when you think about that, at a bare minimum to fend off the bad guys and not be in the news, organizations deploy perimeter security, EDR, so endpoint detection and response, some form of data loss prevention so that if they do get compromised, at least their sensitive data wasn't corrupted, destroyed, or stolen. And then some basic level of privilege account management to understand who are all of my administrators, what access do they have, and is there any abuse of my admin accounts? So that's kind of the bare minimum in your first approach to improving your cybersecurity. When you look at mid-market companies, companies with 500 to 5,000 employees, oftentimes they're at that bare minimum capability. Most small and medium-sized businesses aren't even at that bare minimum. The next set of security features that people start to adopt as they improve their maturity is to detect advanced threat vectors, reduce the attack surface, proactively disrupt kill chains, and to accelerate forensics. And this is where companies start to embrace and adopt SIEM technologies, and they start to log data that focuses on catching beacons and stopping data exfiltration. They start to become better at asset discovery and understanding everything that's in their environment, that's on their network, and who's accessing what. And then they start to apply orchestration and automated response frameworks in order to proactively stifle potential attacks coming in. So if somebody accidentally plugged in a thumb drive, a SOAR script will detect that and automatically remove that machine from the network. And then finally, the very advanced security customers will start to be able to understand user and system behavior. They're able to detect abnormal behavior. So this user is logging in at odd hours, or they logged in from China 10 minutes after they logged in from New York, which isn't possible. And they're able to, through network segmentation, isolate the impact of exploitation. And this is really where zero trust starts to come in. Zero trust is really the advanced combination of privileged account management and network segmentation. And as you improve your security posture and your maturity, you systematically start to embrace these level of defensive capabilities. But what's missing in the conversation is the appropriate sequence of how to test your security posture. And so the first thing you want to do when you're testing your security posture is identify threat vectors that require minimal effort by the attacker in order to exploit you, as well as verify that your defensive products are actually working and effective. And when you think about how you test, you want to start with unauthenticated. So how could an unauthenticated external attacker breach my perimeter and get in? How could an unauthenticated internal user, once they've landed within my environment, elevate privileges, laterally move, and achieve a critical impact? And then how do you run those pen tests with no notice to the security operations team so that they have no idea you're about to run a pen test, and you're going to measure their reaction time? How quickly did they detect your presence of the pen test? How quickly did they stifle that? And you want to use that to measure and improve the reaction time of the defensive team. And you also want to do yes notice pen tests. You want to inform the security operations center that in fact you're going to be running unauthenticated internal and external pen tests against your environment, so that the red team or the pen testing team and the blue team or the defenders are able to work together to proactively harden their systems. And that starts to create the culture of red plus blue, which equals purple teaming within an organization. The next step is, once you feel comfortable that you've been able to find, fix, and verify the remediation of threat vectors that require minimal effort, you then want to start to shift to test threat vectors that require a significant amount of research by the attackers. So 0 days within your custom applications requires a significant amount of research by an attacker to compromise you. And so the level of commitment by that attacker to go from reusable attack scripts where they're going to spray and pray across a large swath of companies as an unauthenticated external user in kind of that first test, that is a very different level of effort compared to a nation state or some entity that is trying to study the internals of your application in order to compromise your environment. So the next kind of layer in this maturity or adoption curve here is identifying application-specific or machine-specific threat vectors that require attackers to invest significant amounts of time researching and building custom exploits. And this is really where you get into specific application security testing of your external application, being able to run as an authenticated internal vulnerability management tool. So think of a Qualys or a Nessus scan. What they're doing is assuming an attacker is able to authenticate and become an authenticated user on the machine, what vulnerabilities are available for them to elevate their privileges. And that takes, once again, a level of compromise that is more specific than an unauthenticated user trying to do that, and also a lot more effort. And then finally, doing more sophisticated application-specific pen testing for your externally facing applications. And then the final bit is an attacker investing a significant amount of time studying the 0 days of your internal applications. This is very rare and is something that you're not going to see very often. But once again, when you're prioritizing how to test your security posture, this is probably one of the lowest priority items, but it should be on the roadmap at some point because of the amount of effort and commitment required by the attacker to compromise you. So once again, the hardest part of the job is deciding what not to do. My experience is the sequence of adoption is the following, where as a high priority kind of co-step ones. On the defensive side is make sure you've got the bare minimum in place to fend off the bad guys. And then on the layered assessment, make sure that you're able to identify and stifle the threat vectors that require the least amount of effort by attackers to exploit. And those two items with number one on the defense and the assessment, that is your basic blocking and tackling. You've got to be an expert at both of those. And once you're an expert at both of those, you can start to open up the aperture and start to adopt more advanced security capabilities. So now you start to detect advanced threat vectors with SIEM. You start to identify app-specific 0 days, so on and so forth. And so this is the sequence of adoption from my experience as a practitioner that's effective. For us as Horizon 3, where do we play? We are laser focused on that number one under layered assessments, where our customers are using us to run unauthenticated internal and external pen tests to be able to identify attack vectors that require the least amount of effort and will cause the most amount of damage. Customers will use us to run no-notice pen tests to verify the reaction time of their SOC, and then they'll run us to help build that purple team culture. If you zoom in on that and talk about a specific customer of ours and how they've done this, this customer, a global manufacturing company with 37 data centers around the world, their motivation, they were paying pen testing consultants to come in. They were not appropriately testing their environment with any sort of discipline of, hey, what are the easiest attack vectors that I need to defend against first? Then where do I focus on 0-day applications or 0-day problems within my custom apps and so on? They were just paying consultants to show up, poke them in the eye, and leave behind a PDF report. The side effect of that is they had the perception of being secure, but they weren't actually secure. And so they got breached and their CISO got fired. And following that particular set of events, as we started talking to them about this idea of layered testing and where to prioritize initially, we went from cold email to deal close in about 8 weeks. When you look at their adoption, they shifted from running 1 to 2 pen tests per year to 16 pen tests per month, where they were continuously finding, fixing, and verifying what was exploitable, as well as being able to use us as a sparring partner for the SOC. This is where they got into no notice pen tests, yes notice pen tests, being able to continuously find, fix, verify to harden their systems. What that created under the covers was first, the primary user of the Node Zero product at this company were not security people, actually. They were IT admins, network engineers, and SOC analysts, where they were using us with 3 clicks to become pen testing superpowers. And so with 3 clicks, you've got the power of a 20-year pen testing expert or veteran. And the way that they use us as, they would run us to find problems. They would go off and fix them using the path, proof, and impact that we provide. And then they would rerun us to verify that the problems were actually solved. And they ended up in this find, fix, verify cycle between the red team, us, and the blue team, their defenders. And as they started to get this model operational, they set the conditions for a purple team culture where attack and defense were working together to harden systems. And the way that manifests itself in results is if you see early on when they started to adopt this approach of layered testing, rapid rise in problems found per host. But you can kind of see the moment when this purple team culture started to click and they started to become better at proactively finding and fixing problems, that there was a dramatic reduction in weaknesses per host over time, allowing them to basically catch up, keep up, and now they're able to free up their capacity to stay ahead of the adversary. So if you make that a little bit more generic and think about the timeline, to the right of the moment an attacker gains initial access is your reactive posture. Can you detect your beacons? Can you detect lateral movement? Can you detect exfil? And what can you do to disrupt your kill chain and conduct forensics? And we spend a lot of our time and money as CISOs and CIOs on the right side of that line. And what you want to be able to do is, and that's where your defense in depth starts to play, but what you want to do is also adequately invest left of that line to be proactive and continuously harden your systems so that you find and fix attack vectors before criminals exploit them. And what you want to be able to do is achieve that without having to install agents, without having to write a bunch of custom scripts that go stale when your environment changes, and without having to pay for consultants to show up, punch you in the eye, and then walk away with the PDF report, and then show up a year later. You want this to be continuous so that you're always hardening your environment. And the way that that purple team culture starts to surface is that red team continuously finds those exploitable attack paths, and hopefully they're triggering security alerts along the way so you know your tools are effective. Back to that LSAS process dump. You want the EDR to catch that, and if you don't catch it, you want to know why you didn't so you can harden your environment. The blue team, very precisely those IT administrators, the network engineers, and the security tool admins, the fixers, their job is to understand what was exploitable and what alerts were not triggered or triggered, and use that as input to quickly fix those problems. And you want that red and blue team to be working independent of the SOC, because the number one priority of the SOC is to defend the enterprise. Their job is to detect beacons, stifle lateral movement, stifle exfil, and so on. And so as you organize your security team, the SOC is all about reaction time, and the red and blue teams are all about systems hardening proactively. And what you end up seeing, back to that manufacturing customer, is the role that autonomous pen testing plays in enabling the red and blue team to work together. So if you take a step back and think about this at the executive or board level of describing your hierarchy of security needs, you think of catch up. How do you start to at least get the bare minimum capabilities in place? And really, when I deal with boards, I don't deal with tech products or tech categories. I interact with the board through the form of questions. You as a board member, what questions should you be asking me so that I can tell you what's happening? You as a board member should be asking me to prove I understand what activity is happening in my environment. You should be asking me as a CISO, prove to me that we know the assets that are in our environment, what things, devices, software, and systems are there, or who is in the environment, and so on. And that really becomes table stakes in the form of questions. As you are able to catch up, now you start to think about how to keep up. Who has access to what data? What if I lose control of my data? How should I respond to an incident, and how do I understand that process is robust? And then finally, as you're able to keep up with the adversary, you start to create the capacity to invest in staying ahead. And this is where you get into concept like zero trust, where you cut out the marketing hype. It really comes down to users are only able to access what they need when they need it from an authorized device. When you think about moving target defense, think of applying frequency hopping and radios, but for IP addresses, where the environment is constantly looking different, making it difficult for an attacker to reconnaissance or conduct recon on you. And an active defense, where the applications themselves are able to detect abuse and shut themselves down. That's all great, sharks with laser beams, pie in the sky type concepts. And for most companies, it's a pretty long journey to get to the stay ahead capabilities, and you have to have the right foundation in place through the catch up and keep up experience. And throughout all of this, you want to be continuously assessing the security posture and effectiveness to make sure that you are properly defending your environment. So what issues must you focus on triaging and fixing? How are you accelerating and improving your detection and remediation time? How do you decide what not to fix? Are your crown jewels actually secure or not? And what do I look like through the eyes of the attacker? And so layered defense and defense in depth is really all of these categories. And then layered assessments, which we talked about, is really the process of assessing your security posture continuously to answer those questions. And what I'll leave you with is the funding approach to this from my experience. The thing is, there's no magic easy button here that says I'm going to be secure if I press this button or buy tools from this vendor. We don't have a tools problem in cybersecurity. We have an effectiveness problem. And the way to improve effectiveness, unfortunately, is a multi-year investment and journey to improving your processes, improving your detection stack, hardening your systems, and improving the quality and caliber talent you have within your team. And so back to the actual funding approach, and the way that I used to get funding from my executive leadership is, hey, we're right now in the catch-up phase. I need to surge a lot of money to go off and catch up in order to keep ourselves out of the news. And I need to assess my posture through pen testing, as we talked about in the layered assessments approach. I need to invest in reducing my attack surface area. I need to invest in accelerating my threat detection, accelerate remediation, and so on. As we get there, I now need funding to more frequently assess my security posture. I need more funding to more effectively manage my assets, to more effectively automate how I detect threats so I can accelerate my detection time, accelerate how quickly I can remediate issues, and then more thoughtfully identify, locate, and protect my crown jewels. And that becomes another bucket of money that you're going to get probably in year 2 or year 2.5. And then finally, in the stay ahead phase, if you think about this as a 5-year journey, your first 18 months are really on catching up, or first 24 months are catching up. Probably the next 18 months are in keeping up. And then probably the final 6 months or so will be on the stay ahead, because at that point you achieved a pretty significant level of maturity. And in this case, you are now continuously assessing your environment. You are able to segment your network to stifle lateral movement, start to apply zero trust principles. You've got significant automated threat detection in place, significant automated remediation in place, and you're able to fiercely isolate your crown jewels and understand any potential abuse of your critical data. So this is the general 3 to 5 year funding plan that I went off and executed to get money to invest in hardening my environment. Once again, with a balance of layered defense and layered assessment along the way. So what I'll leave you with is a little bit about who we are, what we're trying to do, and hopefully what you found was some interesting nuggets of this conversation to help you think about your security strategy. And then you'll quickly realize the role that we can play in helping you. So first, my background, I was a former CIO at GE Capital. I was the former CTO at Splunk, and I served as the first Chief Technology Officer for Joint Special Operations Command. That's where I met Tony, my co-founder, and he and I both started Horizon 3 with the idea of continuously assessing the security posture of organizations to help them proactively find and fix their problems. And what we really see is this idea of disrupting legacy vulnerability scanning, where you have a lot of noise, and being vulnerable doesn't mean you're actually exploitable. For instance, in many of our attack paths, in the credentialed attack example I showed you, no CVEs were used to exploit or compromise that environment. And so as a result, vulnerability scanners would not have caught some of the misconfigurations that were used to enable an attack. That's why, despite having a robust vulnerability management program, companies are still getting crushed through ransomware and other attackers, because this isn't a CVE problem. This is the approach that attackers take in chaining together credentials from one place with misconfigurations in another. When you look at the other kind of option that I had in my legacy world, was paying consultants to show up, pen test me manually, and then leave for a year. And the issue there is I get an incomplete snapshot, and I'll get a PDF left behind that as my team starts to fix them, I have no way to verify that the issue's truly been resolved unless I recontract those consultants to show up again. And then finally, within the legacy breach attack and simulation space, the challenge of having to install agents all over the place, which I definitely don't want to do after SolarWinds, because I don't want to give a vendor unfettered access to my environment, and the need to write custom attack scripts where I can barely do basic security, let alone write advanced attack scripts, became infeasible and untenable. And so what we really do is we sit at the intersection of those categories. And this idea of shifting from manual pen testing to crowdsourced pen testing to automated pen testing, and where we focus is on autonomous pen testing, where there are no consultants, no agents, no custom scripting. It is adaptive attacks. Think of when IBM played Gary Kasparov in chess. IBM didn't hard code 40 million chess games and say, oh, Gary must be playing game number 332. IBM looked at every piece on the board and determined the next best action to win. And that's how attackers behave, and that's how our autonomous pen testing algorithms and platform have been designed. And once again, the outcome here is continuously finding, fixing, verifying, and reporting. And what I'll leave you with, and I said this earlier, is we don't have a tools problem in cybersecurity. We have an effectiveness problem. For example, in 7 minutes and 19 seconds, Node 0 was able to go from being an unauthenticated user on the network to becoming domain administrator in 7 minutes and 19 seconds. This bank where this occurred had every Gucci security tool you could buy, yet not a single security alert was triggered because those tools were not designed to work together. They weren't configured properly, they weren't tuned correctly, or they didn't purchase all the modules that were expected. And so really what we need to do as an industry is focus on fixing the effectiveness problem, and layered security testing is the, at least from my experience, the most successful way to improve the effectiveness of your security posture. So thank you for the time. I'd love to, if there are questions, I'll look in the chat for them. And if not, I appreciate your time here. And if you want to learn more, you can go to the website. You can watch a demo, you can get signed up with a trial. And I hope that you found this informative as a way to start to rethink your overall approach from a security standpoint. And hopefully this helps you decide what not to do and where you should focus your time and energy and efforts. So thank you once again, and I look forward to engaging the conversation both here and in social media.